So this is the question that I posed tonight. Who are the ancients? Are they primitive hunters or wise men? And so the top. So if you listen to someone who's an evolutionist, they'll tell you your ancestors were thick-haired, thick-browed, grunting Neanderthals that lived in caves, hunted with spears, and were shocked to discover fire by accident and the wheel. So this is a paradigm where you have evolution from humanoids, which are ape-like creatures, and then early man, and then developing on through thousands of years to be what we are, Homo sapiens today. The Bible tells a very different story. If you read the stories in Genesis, the history in Genesis, the earth was filled with ancient cities, had sophisticated cultures, had amazing building techniques, which I'll try to show you, astronomy, mathematics, and even primitive electricity, which I don't think many people have heard of in the past, but it's a biblical fact. And the bottom ideas are based on Genesis 2:19. So this is kind of the high-level summary of what we believe. This is borrowed from Answers in Genesis. So the history events are Adam and Eve, the creation, and the corruption or the fall. Then the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve going through the generations to Noah, where God then decided to punish mankind and reduce the population on earth to 8 people. And after the flood, the year-long flood, the people came off the ark and scattered around, but stayed together and again tried to rebel against the Lord again. And we'll go through what the rebellion was. And so God ultimately confused the languages, and that drove the people apart. They could no longer speak the same language because the same language was being spoken before the Tower of Babel by everybody on earth. So here's some quotes from Genesis, and it kind of gives you a feeling for what happened early on. Cain, who was the first son of Adam and Eve, after he killed his brother Abel, was driven away, and actually he married and he conceived a son, and he built a city. So that was one of the first things he did. So cities were built by the second generation on the planet Earth, and he named it after his son Enoch. In the 5th generation, there were wives taken by Lamech, and he had sons, Jabal, who was a tent maker and had cattle, and his brother Jubal, so maybe they were twins, I don't know. But he was the father of people who were able to play musical instruments, build and play musical instruments. And then we have Tubal-Cain, and he was an instructor of people who worked in metals, brass and iron. It's important to know this is the 5th generation after Adam, and people are working in metals, and the secular world tries to identify these ancient times by saying, well, this is the Stone Age, or this is the Bronze Age, or this is the Iron Age. So they tie the ages of the humanity with different metals. But here we see from the very beginning, there's cities, and they're within a couple of generations, there's certainly musical instruments, if not before. It may have been happening before, but these are the annotations that happen in the Bible. So this is kind of a approximate timeline, just to put some years to things. So I'm counting, if you follow the timeline of Bishop Ussher, who claimed that the earth and the universe and humanity and all things were created around a little before 4000 BC. Then you have farming and animal husbandry by 3900 BC. You have architecture with cities, building towers and pyramids and ziggurats by 3750 BC. Advanced technology like metalworking and music by 3200 BC. And then travel, I believe that the history shows that the world was explored by very, very early civilizations like the Phoenicians in 2500 BC, because they had remember the ark was basically a barge, but the size of that barge was 2/3 the size of the Titanic luxury liner. So they had the technology well before, right after the flood. The sons of Noah certainly knew how to build ships. And the ships were seaworthy because God had given them the dimensions and how to build a ship. And then around 2500 BC, we see the people groups being dispersed after the incidents at the Tower of Babel. I'll skip over that. It's these are some timelines. I have them available on a CD-ROM. I won't really go through all of it, but I like to put the extra resources there. If somebody wants to really go back and study and look things up, I put it in there. So here is the basis of the timeline where the people are living for 900 years before the flood. We have the flood around 2450 BC, and we have the Tower of Babel around 2275. So the numbers I gave you, and maybe these numbers may be off by a couple of hundred years. Actually, there's another biblical analysis other than Bishop Ussher, who looked at the timeline, and they came up with a confusion of the languages around 3000 BC. So 2500 to 3000 BC is when all of the people groups who were concentrated at Babel had their languages changed. They were forced because, you could think of people living together and then no one can, all of these different languages are formed, they can't get along, maybe there's arguments or whatever. And as Jesse will show you, there's enough people that have populated the earth at the point where the Tower of Babel was being built that splitting them up into 15 or 20 different language groups and sending them out into the world would quickly repopulate the world, and it would be enough time for a stable population and growth. So I think that's pretty important. I'll skip over that. The one thing about this chart, this is showing the ages of the lineage of Adam, and they were having their offsprings at about 100 years of age. Some were 60s, but there were also hundreds. And so there was 100 years before the first male child. After the flood, and the Lord again reiterated to multiply and fill the earth, you see now these ages are down in the 30s. So the average age was about 30 as the lifespan decreased after the flood. So one of the places to go is, okay, I want to know how old things are and what happened. Let's go look at some calendars, some ancient calendars. And so one of them is obviously the Hebrew calendar. And so the question is, what's the year in the Hebrew calendar, and also what's the year in another ancient people group is the Chinese. So what's the year in the Chinese calendar? So for the Hebrew calendar, the year is 5774, and that agrees pretty well with the 6,000 years, close to that. There may have been some years that didn't get counted, but we're not sure of that. And then in the Chinese calendar, I think it's 4711. I don't know if anybody knows a different number, but that's what it said on the internet. And my belief is that probably started counting after the flood, And so the people would have started their calendar, and then they dispersed, and the people's groups that went to China then set up their civilization, which has been a continuous civilization ever since they first began. So let me sort of summarize what are the options here. So one option is creation, which you've heard, and you'll hear the rest of the talk. So the earth and man is created 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. It's a young earth. Ancient aliens, you hear this on TV. This is the theory where aliens from outer space come and seed the earth with life and then come back and help with technology and build things. And the people have the right idea. They see these fantastic structures, and I confess absolutely that I plagiarize and I steal some of their information. But what they're basically saying is what they're finding is inconsistent with evolution. It doesn't fit with the paradigm that I told you about, the early grunting man, and people have been on the earth for millions of years. And so the bottom two paradigms are secular evolution, where we develop from a humanoid-like ape creature, that Homo sapiens have been on the earth for 150,000 years. That doesn't correlate. And the stupid grunting primitive bushman, it doesn't square with what people find. Archaeologists find things that contradict that daily. And in the other group, this is even a further fringe group. This group believes that man's been men on the earth for millions of years. And this is kind of a spin-off of a Indian religious belief. So I'm not going to spend much time on that, but the first three I'll talk about. And this is the guy from Ancient Aliens, and he's being it's sort of a depiction of the Sistine Chapel, if you will, where this guy is Adam and the alien is God touching him. And what I've done here is, and in your handout, these are two sites that have gone through all of this ancient alien material. And if there's anybody in your family, like one of your kids or a neighbor or something that's, the ancient aliens, you don't understand, have them go to this website, because there's a fellow who's gone through each one of the TV shows and just torn it apart. So if anybody's hooked on Ancient Aliens, go there and then come back and see what you have to say, because I think he does an excellent job. But these people have a lot of resources. They're funded by the television networks, and they go out and they gather this information. So I'm sitting here using the information, but I'm using it for good instead of their intention. At least I'm trying to. So again, this is just a repeat. So what do we see? What do the theologians, scientists, and archaeologists say? And what we see is that about 45,000 years ago, or 2500 BC, essentially all civilizations got started. As the second line shows, first civilization sprung up in Egypt and Samaria. They sprang up in the Americas, Turkey, China, India, all about 2,500 years ago. So it seems like everything is kind of coordinated. If you think back to the biology when they were discussing how the life forms suddenly appeared, they call that the Cambrian explosion. That was a place and time where there were, first of all, no animals or maybe microbes, and then all of a sudden there was a plethora of animals of all different genus and species that were on the earth, and they couldn't explain it. So as the biologists can't explain it, then the people who are paleontologists, they're having the same problem. All of a sudden, we've got these hunter-gatherers, and they've got little tribes, and they're building fires and fighting other tribes and that. And then all of a sudden, we've got Babylon, and we've got Ur, and we've got Nineveh. And we've got all of these fantastic cities and great accomplishments, the pyramids. And as David Larson said a couple of weeks ago, the pyramid that was the most elaborate and the biggest and the most well built was the first one, not the last one. So there's something to think about there. And then all of a sudden, you see farming and you see technology, medicine. I'm going to show you examples of this tonight. Government, travel. There's maps of the world that exist that shouldn't exist, but they do. So how did we get there? Anyway, so let me just go through this. So the paradigm is, let me go back to full screen. The paradigm is, what do we believe? On the one side, we start with monkeys and change into humanoids, and then we go up the ladder, and finally we got this guy in the business suit going off to a meeting. Or on the right-hand side is God's word, where we were made in God's image with Adam and Eve, and Adam was able to name all the animals the first day. He was put in charge of maintaining paradise, and that was the plan until he sinned and brought death into the world. So then we've got this character down here with the nice hairdo. So what do we want to believe? Psalm 118 says it's better to put trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. And that's that's what we're comparing here, what the Lord says in the Bible versus what man says in his secular version of history. This is a great book that is it's an easy read, and it has a lot of information in it. It's called The Genius of Ancient Man. It's by Don Landis in the Jackson Hole Bible College. It's extremely interesting. Let me see if that one will play. No, I got everything but picture. That's weird. Okay, so I won't play that one. But it basically challenges everything about having these artifacts come to light that people can't explain with regard to the pyramids, with regard to travel around the world, with regard to religious activities. So it's a very interesting and challenging book with regard to the evolution and what people think. The next one, the next book I've read and like a lot is called After the Flood. This is basically a man who spent 25 years research going around in Europe, and he traces the lineage of the different monarchies in Ireland and Britain and Germany and other places back to the sons of Noah. And he has documentation, he shows records, he shows historical documents that are agreed with by history professors and that have these lineages back to that time, and with the people's names or in writing, basically. And you never hear about that. The other thing I thought about is, well, why don't we just go find the ancient libraries? There must be things written down. I know there's a lot of artifacts that we find on stone carvings, and we find clay tablets, and we found things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. So there must be histories that are written by people, and those should be stored and maintained somewhere. So I looked up a few of these libraries, and I'll take just one example, which is a really famous one, is the famous library in Alexandria, Egypt. And what I found was, so that library was really a part of a research institute, they called it, the Museum of Alexandria. It was established by Alexander the Great, and the city was certainly built after him, and all of the knowledge, the attempt there was to gather all the knowledge from the world and bring it into one place. And they used papyrus rolls, which were thousands of years old by then. The papyrus was a great way to store information, and probably the value of that information was incalculable because they had all of the medical history in that. But what I found out is when you look at what happens when people are conquered by war, the winning party tries to obliterate the history or even the existence of the people that they conquer. So the library at Alexandria had been burnt 4 different times. It was burned twice by the Romans, Caesar and Aurelius, and then it was burned once by a pope for the Christian Crusades, and then finally the Muslims came in and burned what was left. So that library was totally destroyed, but there were similar libraries in Greece and in Persia and other places, and so whenever a country was conquered, the victors tried to decimate and obliterate what they call it scorched earth policy. So they're going to burn everything, take the people as captives and slaves, and just ruin that society. So that's the reason why I don't think there's very little or no information left from some of these great libraries that existed throughout the world. So let me talk about the movement of people. This is sort of on the top half is the secular version, on the bottom half is the Bible's version. And basically, so if you look at the red, that's Africa. That's where the humanoids were found, the transitional elements that the evolutionists say were part monkey and then turned into man and slowly evolved. So Africa was the home of the very first men, and then their model says that they moved out of Africa through the Middle East and then into Europe and Asia and then over the land bridge to the Americas and South America and down to South America, basically. In the biblical approach, it's exactly the same, except you don't have the origin being in Africa. You have the origin being in the Mesopotamia and in the Fertile Crescent, basically. So there's something, if you remember back to high school, I can hardly remember high school, let alone what I studied in high school, but I think I went to high school. Yeah, I did. Jim might vouch for me. But anyway, you heard of the Fertile Crescent. That's one thing that stuck in my mind. And there you have the famous cities that are, discussed at some length in the Bible. Nineveh, Jonah was resistant going there. Babylon, and then the home of Abram. So that's what the Bible says is the source for the civilizations that populated the world. I'll skip over that. And also, these are some models of ships. The one on these two with sails, actually. So think about. So Noah knows how to build an ark, and obviously his sons helped him build the ark, so they know how to build a very seaworthy ship. And so when you want to go someplace, okay, I don't want to just float. The ark was built to just be a barge and float. It wasn't going anywhere. It just didn't want to kill everybody on board. But so you need some way of moving. So obviously the two ways for, if you don't have mechanized motors, is the wind. So you have sails, or you have oars. So you have human power. So the first ships, these are models that were found in actually in some of the pyramids of boats that were in Egypt in 2500 BC. And this is a Minoan boat. It doesn't look like it has sails, but has a lot of people there, so they probably have oars. So they can go around. And these ships, as I said, they had the technology to build something that's 2/3 the size of the Titanic. So big ships and ships that can travel from one part of the earth to the other. And there's a lot of information on the internet that I didn't pull up and put in here, but the early Phoenicians are claiming the early Phoenicians, 2000 BC, were going around the world. So it wasn't, I don't want to, anybody who's believes Christopher Columbus discovered America put their fingers in their ears, but we probably think it was either a Phoenician or a Norseman. Here's really something. There's a bunch of ancient maps, but this one is put together by a Turkish admiral. His name is Peri Reis, and he published it in 1513, but when he published it, he said that he had used maps from what he called the ancient sea kings. There's actually a book called Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings that you can read. And he put this together, and he claimed that he used information before Alexander the Great. So that's about 400 BC. So he's using all of that information to put together a map. And so what's so remarkable about it is, he has Africa and he has South America. But down here at the very bottom, he has a depiction of Antarctica. And he has the depiction of the land masses without the glaciers on top. So this had to, when they flew over and they did radar mapping through the ice glaciers and everything just recently, this map and that data agrees almost exactly. So the land masses that exist under the packs of snow in the Antarctic that hide these islands actually wasn't there, because I don't think the ancient people had radar mapping. So he was able to tell what that was. So that was thousands and thousands of years ago. And in the creation science, David says he doesn't believe in an ice age. Actually, most of the people in creation science do believe in an ice age, and they believe that the ice age happened right after the flood, when so much moisture was pumped into the air and was in the air that once it blocked the sunlight, then it got very cold. And immediately after Noah landed on Mount Ararat, there was tremendous snow for many years, and that's what established the glaciers. So these maps are telling us something that we just recently found out. And nobody can explain this. You can ask any person who's a secular scientist, and they said they have no idea how that can be true. But it is. Somebody asked me last week when I was doing the greeting, well, what about cavemen? So I had to throw something in about cavemen. There are cavemen in the Bible, okay? So I just pulled out 3 different citations. One's in Job, where he's talking about people living in caves of the earth and rocks. And then in Judges, there's another reference to people living in dens and caves. And then in Kings, 1 Kings, there's also where they're trying to protect the prophets. Obadiah is trying to protect the prophets who are hiding people in caves. So there were caves and there were cave people. It's okay. Don't fixate on that. It's just, it's a nice living place, probably low maintenance, and hopefully it doesn't rain, because this cave looks like it runs downhill. I think I'll skip over that. So let's jump over to Nimrod. So Nimrod's a pretty interesting person. If you look in the genealogy, so this is a table that Jesse's going to talk about, but here's Noah, and then the first generation after Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then he has the first generation after his sons, and then the second generation after his sons, Nimrod was born. So this is a second generation after the sons of Noah. And then there was a third generation who was Babel, and then the fourth generation was Peleg. So let me go back up. So Nimrod was a mighty warrior and conqueror. And the belief that I've seen from the documentation that I've read is that he started his kingdom in Babel. So he was the one who created the tower, and he was a very rebellious person. And also he built Nineveh, and we know from the Bible and the tale of Jonah that Nineveh was a very, very corrupt and evil city. So the feeling is that Nimrod was a very evil person, and was rebellious. The main important thing is he was rebellious towards the Lord, because the edict from God was to disperse, fill the earth, multiply, and he was the one that was gathering people together and fighting and rebelling against the Lord. So that was an important thing. In the Tower of Babel, he stated he wanted to, have the God's dictum was to disperse around the world and have self-government with God at the head. But Nimrod, he said his purpose was to make a name for himself and avoid being scattered. So again, in direct opposition to what the Lord is telling him in the Bible. I have a movie about Babel, but we don't have that. So let me jump over to architecture. So let's look at some. So we've had, books, we've had writings. So now let's look at architecture. And the striking thing is that people at around 2500 BC were all building pyramids and towers and structures that boggle the minds of present day scholars. And that's very well documented. This information comes down through many, many different cultures. And so you can just go through this litany. These are the pyramids at Giza. But there's a list of pyramids here. There's ziggurats in Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Nubia, which is in southern part of below Egypt in Africa, China, Mexico, another one in China, in Indonesia, in Cambodia, and Mexico. All of these pyramids and towers and ziggurats are throughout the world. And I took a map of the world and pulled some of the pictures, and you can see they're scattered all over the world, in all of the places I just mentioned. And there's even some, this one right here is actually in Bermuda, underwater. So there are underwater pyramids that have been found by skin divers and other people. There's the French scientific organization actually has a permanent station now at that location near Bermuda that they're investigating these pyramids. And so there's something that's saying to these people they want to build these pyramids, probably based on their knowledge of what happened at the Tower of Babel. They're trying to recreate that experience, essentially, that their ancestors had. This is a picture from that actually is the recreation of the ziggurat at Ur that was built by Saddam Hussein. And it was kind of a sidelight, but they said that they thought that this was the location of his weapons of mass destruction. So when they first captured that city of Ur in the Desert Storm, this is one of the first places they searched for weapons of mass destruction. But you can see it's a massive, there's a truck over here, so you can see how big this structure is. And this is a recreation from plans that they found. So this is how big it was. And this is also another interesting thing. I don't know if you've seen this or not. This is in Bosnia. They found 3 pyramids in Bosnia that are covered with earth. And they know that they're pyramids because when they go and dig in the side of the earth, they come to blocks. So they tunnel in 10 or 20 feet and they hit a stone, and then they carve around that stone and they find a big wall, and then they find a step and everything. So they've done radar and other kinds of analysis of these structures. And I think this, David mentioned that he thought the Great Pyramid at Giza was actually built before the flood. I definitely think these Bosnian pyramids that are covered with earth, I mean, you would think that if you were in a flood and then there was debris and material all over. And the other interesting thing is these pyramids are 700 feet tall, which are almost 1.5 times greater height than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And you may not even have heard of this, but they're all over the world. There are these temples in Cambodia and everything that are in the jungle and not well documented, or people don't want to talk about them. The secular people don't want to talk about them because it doesn't agree with their ideas. Here's just a listing of megalithic statues and objects around the world. This one here is at Karnak, the obelisk at Karnak. And when I looked up the weight of that obelisk, it weighs the same as 15 railroad locomotives. 15. So that's the kind of weight that these people were able to handle and maneuver and situate with their intelligence, right? The Great Pyramids, I think David went over some of this. There's over 2.3 million limestone blocks. The blocks are oriented within a tiny fraction of a degree of alignment with north-south. There's a lot of other interesting information with regard to the precision. But the one thing, this is a picture of what the pyramids would have looked like before that they were vandalized. So the pyramids were covered on the outside by polished limestone. And the only thing that remains, let me go back a couple. The only thing that remains of that limestone is up here on one of the pyramids. But it was polished, and they said when people climb up here and they look at those stones, those giant stones that butt up against each other, you can't slip a credit card between the adjacent stones. So they're cut with such precision and accuracy that you can't slip a plastic credit card between these giant megalithic stone facing. And the pyramids are just one. They had you've heard of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The tower, the hanging gardens in Babylon. You had the statue of Zeus in Olympia. The lighthouse at Alexandria, they said that the light could be seen for hundreds of miles. So how did they do that? People were either exaggerating or there was technology there that nobody knew about. And I just want to point out, when you plot all of the locations of these 7 wonders of the world, they're all right around that Fertile Crescent. You have Ephesus that we know well of, and the Temple of Artemis, and we've got the mausoleums, and also the Rhodes. There's the Colossus of Rhodes, the Hanging Gardens, the pyramids, the lighthouse, all right around that Fertile Crescent. So it says to me that those were the most advanced civilizations, and they were probably the location of the first civilizations, not deep in Africa somewhere. This is Stonehenge. You've probably seen it. It's used for different things. It is an astronomical site, and actually I heard today on the radio there was an announcer was talking about Stonehenge, and he said the people had such good engineering that they knew the weight of these giant megalithic stones would compress the earth. So when they built the structure, they actually took that compression into account so that when the stone settled, it stayed in the right place. And so then you could do the sightings and look for all of the information you wanted with regard to the astronomy. This is Easter Island. I call the big guy in the middle Bob for some reason. Interesting. This is Puma Punku. Maybe I'll play a couple of seconds of this one.
Puma Punku is so unique in the way that it was constructed and shaped and positioned that it is the most intriguing ancient site on the planet.
While the pyramids at Giza are incredible feat of achievement, compared to Puma Punku, the pyramids are child play. In my opinion, the most significant piece of evidence that we have in this entire ancient astronaut puzzle is Puma Punku in the highland of Bolivia.
Well, if Puma...
Okay, so this is the guy. I'll just play a second of this. So this is the guy that does the debunking of the ancient astronaut. So let me play a little moment of his.
Pumapunku is considered such good evidence for the ancient astronaut theory, we should probably start off by looking at it. After all, it's the one that they say was built directly by extraterrestrials.
Pumapunku is the only site on planet Earth that, in my opinion, was built directly by extraterrestrials.
Ancient Alien starts off with a false dilemma by making people think that it was absolutely impossible for ancient people to construct Pumapunku, even to the point of making outright false claims.
One of the most intriguing things...
I'm going to stop it there, but it goes on. But it's sort of, he plays a television show, and then this guy comes on and he shows scientific data, he shows measurements, he shows all of this stuff. So he's telling... he's rebutting the story in real time and by jumping back and forth. So again, I'm saying if you've got people who are ancient alien believers, then show those two websites and then see what they think. The other thing that's intriguing to me is ancient tunnels. And so there are places in the world. This is a tunnel. Most of the pharaohs that were buried in Egypt actually were not buried in pyramids. They were buried in underground chambers. And there's been farms of these underground chambers found in the Valley of the Kings, and have innumerable pharaohs and their wives and all of the people that were in the royal family in that. And these are many, many, many hundreds of feet underground. The other one, I'll skip that one. Another one that's really intriguing is in South America and Guatemala, there's a tunnel complex under Tikal, which is the Mayan pyramid complex of 500 miles of tunnels. That's like a tunnel from Los Angeles further than San Francisco. You think we could do that? The EPA wouldn't let us, so anyway. So there's tremendous engineering that's going on here. This one I really love. This is a tunnel complex at a city called Derinkuyu in Turkey. Let me play a little bit of that one since my video is working. Again, the ancient astronauts.
Bordered on the north by the Black Sea and by the Taurus Mountains to the south, lies Cappadocia in central Turkey. Here, wind and water have sculpted strange shapes out of the soft volcanic rock. Rock which ancient peoples once turned into small primitive dwellings. In more recent years, the site has seen the construction of more modern structures. But in 1963, a simple home renovation in the town of Derinkuyu led to an extraordinary discovery when a cave wall was opened, revealing a passageway to an underground city thousands of years old and more than 280 feet deep.
I've been there on multiple occasions, and it's incredible because there's 13 stories that go deep into the ground with ventilation shafts and 15,000 little shafts that bring air to even the deepest of levels. Incredibly, the number of rock rooms that were found could hold over 20,000 men, women, and children. There was even evidence of religious centers, storerooms, wine presses, and stables for livestock.
Oh, Derinkuyu would have been a massive undertaking for anyone, even in modern times, with modern equipment. But in those days, it would have been stupendous. Equal to the pyramids. At Derinkuyu, because of the softness of the stone, you had to be very careful that you provided enough pillar strength to support the floors above. Otherwise, you'd have catastrophic cave-ins. Surprisingly, there's no evidence of any catastrophic cave-ins, so they were apparently extremely clever and knew their material.
So they're extremely clever. 20,000 people underground. Okay, let me keep going. So I went and, so one of the things that it might seem frivolous, but what do people wear? What do these ancient people wear? They have loincloths and all of that. And these are, I've taken pictures that are taken of actual paintings, not somebody's recreation. These are actually paintings on walls of tombs or carvings on the side of pyramids or on the side of religious artifacts or whatever. And you see, here's a woman that has a wig. It says it's made out of fabric. And here ladies, they obviously have jewelry on. They have makeup. So they actually said one of these movies that I have found, it said all of the technology that went into making eyeshadow and rouge and things like that. It's all chemistry, right? You go to Jafra over in Westlake, and they're making sophisticated cosmetics for ladies. So these societies weren't, clubbing. The men didn't club the women over the head with a club in order to make them their wife. They were probably giving them, cosmetics and flowers and things like we do. Also, the ancient technologies. This is kind of turns me on because I'm an engineer, and I'll show you some of these. I don't have to jump through it because I'm a little bit behind, but they had lenses. They found lenses that were in museums, and nobody knew what they were. They've gone to the Louvre and British Museum, and they found things in the cellar the people have just collected and not put on display because they didn't know what it was. Ancient stone cutting, as it was depicted in that one movie I showed you. Ancient medicine, the medical arts were highly, highly developed in ancient times. And even I'll show you a little video of the Baghdad battery. So this is just a listing. Lenses were 2500 BC, stone cutting 2500 BC. There was medical care, Neanderthal times. There's depictions of bones that are found where there's been healing of broken bones and broken legs. They had a clock, a water clock that was invented in 1500 BC, seismographs in China in 400 BC, abacus, which we know that if you know how to use the abacus, it's much faster than even an electronic calculator and just as accurate. And that was 2300 BC. So this is all exciting. All of these lenses and everything. Let me jump down to, I'm sorry, I have to jump ahead. But in the astronomical knowledge, the people in Egypt, they knew when you look at the Sirius stars in the heavens, they knew that there were two stars. One's called Sirius A, the big one, and Sirius B is a smaller one. And they found writings in Egypt that says that the period when the smaller star circles the bigger star takes 50 years to go around the bigger star. And you can't see this with the naked eye. It's totally impossible. You have to have a telescope of some kind. But you go to Wikipedia and it says that we didn't find that out until 1862. So they're not telling us the truth. The conventional wisdom that's out there is telling you it's. And this is the reference. Robert Temple, The Crystal Sun: Rediscovering Lost Technologies of the Ancient World. So if you want to look that up, of what the people knew in the past, it's all there. And also with regard to surveying, you think about the pyramids in ancient Egypt. The base had to be tremendously flat in order to support that weight. 2.3 million blocks of 5 tons each. So when they looked at the base of the pyramid, they found that it was level over the area of 12 football fields within 7/8 of an inch of being perfectly flat. They found, this is another thing that most books say, there was no metal used in Egypt. They found when they go around and they relook at things, people don't look for things sometimes. They found out that there was wrought iron that was embedded in pieces of the pyramid that was brought back, and it was been in the basement of the British Museum for the past 180 years. Nobody knew about it. This is a picture of some ancient stone cutting. They're dealing with cutting stones because they had that for their temples and buildings. And this is an amazing stone. This is a 1,200 ton stone in Lebanon. It's at the temple of Belek. So it's a temple built to Baal, right? The enemy of God. And this is a stone that, because of its massive weight, it's actually sunk into the ground. But there are other stones. If you look on the left, you see that there's other stones of approximately this size that were used in building these temples. So the ancient peoples were able to handle and position and shape these pieces of stone. There's stoneware for serving food, stone vases that are carved. This one's very interesting. This is a computer that was found that was from the time of Christ. This is a computer. Let me play this one for you.
Often described as the world's first mechanical computer, it dates back over 2,000 years.
The Antikythera device was found in 1900 by sponge divers diving off a small island in the Aegean called Antikythera. There was a shipwreck there, and in it was a coral-encrusted box, and it was made of metal alloys. And it then went to the Athens Museum, where a good 50 years later, they were able to X-ray this box, and they were able to discern cogged wheels that were interconnected and give us a very good depiction of what this thing was. And it is a computer. It's a really sophisticated machine.
It's a very interesting piece of technology because it served two purposes. One was that it was an astronomical device where you could, by using it, chart your position to the stars and navigate your way through the seas. It was also an astrological device, so that someone could tell you, if you were born on this date and your planet sign is this, then certain things are going to happen to you when the planets are in this alignment. So it was a very interesting piece of technology that literally had more complicated gears and inner workings than a modern-day Swiss watch.
So I'll leave it there. So that was in the time of Christ, actually before the time of Christ. I think it was maybe 200 BC. This is another device that is used. They found this in Europe. This is called a Nebra sky disk, and it was found in it was constructed, they believe, in 1600 BC. And it's a disk that you use, and you do sightings to the sun and the different stars. So as the Bible tells us, the stars were made for the signs of seasons, and so what the farmer could do if he had one of these, he could tell when the solstices were, and so when he should plant his crops, when he should harvest his crops. So just by holding this up and aligning the sun and aligning the stars, they had a method of doing their farming and growing things and also navigating. So we didn't have compasses and things like that, but we had the stars, as God has always told us. They're for navigation and helping us get around where we need to go. This is an ancient water clock, so they've determined the dripping of the water, and there was a readout. So this is from Babylon and Egypt, maybe 2000 BC. This is a sundial from India, and it tells the time accurate to 1 second. Because this is a 4-story tall building, and the shadow is cast on this very complex shaped readout, and so when the sun's up, you can tell the time within 1 second. This is the Mayan calendar. Actually, I have a Mayan calendar here. Can you come up and you can hand it around? Thank you. So the Mayan calendar dates back to five centuries before Christ. And this calendar and the writings that they found is that they knew the accuracy of the year within 99.9999% accurate to what we know today. 99.9999. 500 years before Christ. This is I'm jumping through these, but this is a stone marker. So this was an apparatus that was pulled behind a horse, and then it dropped a stone every 1 mile. If you've ever been to Italy and you travel the road, you see these little stone markers on the side of the road, those mile markers. Well, that's how they got them, and it was very accurate. Let me do the Chinese technology for just a second.
It's a common assumption that the machines that power our lives were invented by us in modern times. But is this true? Today, new discoveries from the ancient world are forcing us to reconsider and to rethink the development of mechanical science. And what we are discovering is leading scholars to go back and rewrite the history books. These are the machines of ancient China.
So, I mean, this is another half-hour movie, but they had blast furnaces so that they could make metals. They could make steel just as capably as we do. They had stone crushing devices for manufacturing aggregates. They had mills with cogs and wheels and water-powered apparatus that could grind meal because their population was growing and they wanted to maintain that growth. And so they mechanized. And so all of these ideas that we think are from the Middle Ages, the 1500s, the 1600s, the 1700s, they were all there a few hundred years after Christ. Let me go back. This is one that was fascinating to me. 400 BC, there was an inventor who invented a seismograph, because in China there's a lot of earthquakes, and they wanted to know the direction that the earthquake was so that they could send rescue teams to help people. And these dragons in this pot had balls in their mouth, and they had a inverted pendulum on the inside. And so when the earth shook, it shook in a certain that moved that pendulum and dropped the ball from the dragon's mouth into a frog's mouth, and that told them the direction, so they could start sending rescue teams out to help the people that were suffering from the earthquake. Pretty amazing. This is an oil drilling rig from 700 AD in China. And this is a blast furnace, and we know about gunpowder. Let's go to the electroplating. So this is what they call the Baghdad battery. It's something that they found, and let me run the video, and I think that will probably answer questions.
In 1938, Wilhelm Koenig, the German director of the National Museum of Iraq, became aware that some of the jars in his museum's collection were not empty, but that each contained an iron rod within a copper cylinder. They were sealed at the top with asphalt, and the iron rod was isolated from the copper cylinder, which was crimped at the bottom. The jars were not watertight, however. A liquid poured into a jar would fill the tube as well, and there is evidence that the jars once contained something acidic. The combination of iron, copper, and an acidic solution is familiar to chemists. It is typical of a device in which chemical energy is converted into electrical energy. In other words, a battery. But the jars, collectively nicknamed the Baghdad battery, could date back as far as 2,200 years. Given their age, could the jars really have been batteries? Is this an early form of electrochemistry? The interaction between chemical and electrical energy.
The artifact we're talking about.
I'll stop it there. So one of the applications, and you think about a lot of the artifacts as you read in the Bible, They were gold-coated artifacts. And you can think, okay, well, you could take a piece of gold, it's a soft material, and you pound it out, and you pound it out, and you make a flat sheet, and then you roll it, and you make a flat sheet. You make it thinner and thinner because you just want the surface to be coated with gold. But if you had a way of plating, and my guess is they use this for electroplating, you could take an object, a metal object, and electroplate gold onto it, just like, costume jewelry has a thin coating of gold on a metal underneath. That would be a very efficient way of using the gold and save a lot of money. Thank you. So I think that's one of the interesting things. And yes, there were batteries. And there's even conjecture, this is another piece from the Ancient Aliens I won't go into, but they claiming that they actually had light bulbs that they used to illuminate the inside of tombs and that, because when they go in, they search on the ceiling of these tombs, say the ones dug deep in the ground that are dark. How do you get light down there? And they were saying, oh, well, maybe it was mirrors. They shined the sun in the mirrors. But you see these twisty columns, and they go down and to the right and all of that. They couldn't use mirrors to get light deep down there. And when they look at the ceiling, they do analysis for carbon, looking for the soot from torches. They find none. So somehow they were able to light the inside of these construction projects without using torches, using fire. This is papyrus, which is used for the writing. There's indications that was available many thousands of years before Christ. This is ancient medicine. This is a very fascinating area with Egypt and Mesopotamia and China, all having very sophisticated medical treatments. And it's kind of interesting. In China, we know they have acupuncture and they have cupping and they have herbs that have been used for centuries, and that they can cure a lot of diseases that even Western medicine can't cure. And they had doctors in Egypt that were able to cure many, many different kinds of disease. You think about these workers that are on the pyramids, there's got to be a lot of broken bones and people with gashes in their head and bleeding and all of that stuff. They knew how to treat them. And this, in fact, the first doctor they ascribed to being Imhotep, who was also one of the designers of the pyramids. So he actually was doing double duty, and he was curing abdominal disease, bladder disease, rectal disease, eye disease. And they even had ancient dentists. This is a wood carving of an Egyptian dentist. It looks like some of the tools that my dentist used, but maybe not. And then the other thing that's amazing is there's evidence that there was ancient brain surgery. So in Persia and also in some of the Americas, you find skulls that have holes in them. And then you find, especially in this skull, there's evidence of regrowth of bone. So the bone doesn't regrow if the person dies. So what it says is the person had brain surgery, and that person, after the brain surgery, lived long enough for the bone to start growing in. So they've calculated they live for 10 or 20 or 30 years after the surgery. So ancient medicine is a lot better than we probably thought it was. And I even found a video where they were telling about the use of leeches. So leeches, that's kind of a joke. Okay, we don't bleed the person, or we put leeches on them as a medical treatment. But what they found is a lot of the soldiers had damage to their foot or their ankle through the wars and combat that they were in. And if you put a leech on the foot, then that draws the blood to that area. And what you need to heal, so the body, they would pack it in herbs, and then the leeches would draw fresh blood from other parts of the body to that wounded area. And so actually the leech is not a bad medical practice. You use leeches, or? No, they still use them in some cases. Yeah. Yeah. So we laugh at some of these ancient things, but they're actually, there's rhyme and reason. This is a book I have, if anybody has a real interest. It's called Ancient Medical Technology by Mary and Michael Woods. And it's an easy read, lots of pictures. And it goes through and it talks about the Chinese medicine, Indian medicine, and all over the world, Greek medicine. So all of these technologies are very up to date. And then the final thing I was going to talk about was, we know ancient Ur from the Bible. They have indications that there was abacus and multiplication tables from the period of around 26 to 2300 BC. And many times they've had contests where people use an abacus, and then there's a guy with an electronic calculator, and the abacus always wins with regard to speed, and accuracy. So it's pretty amazing, and so I think I'm to the end of my part. The question is, for all these undisputable technologies and historical accomplishments, what do the scientists say? What are the secular scientists telling us? And it's pretty much the aliens did it. So they basically don't have answers to any of these things about the technologies. It's all a mystery. They call it out of place artifacts, and these are just anomalies. As if you listen to David Larson's talk, they call them anomalies.